It's Derek Gunn. I'm Rob Ellis. We're Sports Day, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Appreciate you hanging with us. We just wrapped things up with Jeff McLean. We go to one of Jeff's colleagues at the Philadelphia Inquirer, who does an amazing job covering the Eagle for the Sixers for the Inky. And you can follow him on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers. That is Keith Pompey. Keith, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing?
What's good, fellas?
All right.
Keith, we're good. It's official now.
Yeah.
Nick Nurse, the worst kept secret, I guess, but they have made it official that Nick Nurse is in the house. I guess the first question I have, Keith, maybe a weird one, but man, we saw the contract that Monty Williams got.
Ooh.
How much are they paying Nick Nurse?
I mean, I don't know. I wish. I mean, I'm assuming it might be. I'm assuming because Nick was making what eight in Toronto. I heard around there, so I'm assuming it's about the same. You would think. You know,
Ooh, man,
pays the coach these days.
What did Monty do to get that kind of cash from Detroit? Or are they just that desperate?
Well, Monty was smart. Monty was the one who said when he realized they wanted him, he's like, "Hey, I'm taking a year off. Taking a year off," and then they kept coming back. But yeah, Monty. When you look at it, you know, Monty. What was it when his first year with the New Orleans Pelicans? They won, I believe, 9 more games than they did the year before that. And it was something like 15 more games in Phoenix. So when you bring all this stuff up, you're saying to yourself, like, this guy is a good coach to turn struggling teams into winners. And let's face it, he was real successful in New Orleans to a point where they were upset that he couldn't get out of the first round. So they fired him. And then, you know, the same thing with Phoenix. So, you know, I guess that's the right guy to get if you're tired of tanking and you want to turn it into a playoff caliber team.
Hey, but you know, I will add this though. Then if I'm coaches like Eric Spoelstra and Denver's head coach, I'm thinking, wait a minute, what am I worth then?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Hey, Detroit just opened up a whole new can of worms in terms of what NBA coaches now. That's like. It's like what Arizona did in football, giving Kyler Murray that kind of money. Quarterbacks in the NFL and saying, hold up a minute. Kyler Murray ain't even close enough to carry my jock. What am I worth now? You know what I mean?
You're saying, hey, he doesn't even know the plays?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, my God. So, Keith, tell us, you know, what's Nurse bring to the table? Obviously, he won a championship. He was coach of the year even the next year. But tell us what he brings in terms of coaching acumen and what kind of style we're looking at here, offensively, defensively, et cetera.
You know, that's a great question. In regards to what he brings, I think that, you know, well, first of all, he brought the same thing that Doc Rivers did in regards to a championship resume, right? So we got to get rid of that, right? But that's the one thing that he brings that's going to get you to the next level. Secondly, is he thinks out of the box. He's really good at making adjustments. And you know, when we talk about Doc Rivers, not a knock against him, but the one thing that people said he didn't do was make adjustments in games, especially big games. And that's Nick Nurse's MO. Also, when you look at it, you know, he had Kawhi Leonard for 1 year. They won the championship. But outside of that, he really had a bunch of role players, and he elevated those guys to become all-stars. You talk about Pascal Siakam. You talk about Fred VanVleet. Right. Mm-hmm. So these are two guys who thrived over under Nick Nurse. So those are the things. Now, he's a defensive minded coach. What he likes to do is he likes to swarm. He likes to get under people's skin. But offensively, before he became the head coach, he was known as the offensive coordinator, so to speak. He loves to shoot threes. When he was in the G League and when early on in his career in Toronto, like especially in the G League, his team, the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, shot like 54 threes a game.
Jeez.
54, right? Jeez. So he's one of these guys who, if you give him the right roster, he's going to spread the floor, get a lot of shooters out there, and that should open up things for Joel Embiid.
I'm glad you said the right roster because it just leads me into my next point. When you look at the current, you know where I'm going. You look at the current state of this team, and we still don't know who's going to be here and who's not. But I think we have a pretty good understanding of the majority of the players that will still be here. When you look at the players that will still be here, does Nick Nurse have the type of players he needs to get better defensively? Because let's face it, perimeter defense killed this team, number one. And number two, be more astute in the 3-point shooting game?
You know, that's too great. Nah, I don't think so. And especially not the defensive thing. Like the defensive thing, like you said, the perimeter defense killed you. In regards to being more astute in the threes, it's like, you know, a guy that you hope that will be more consistent coming off the bench, you know, is going to be Daniel House, right? Daniel House is a guy that you need to. Then you think about it saying, whoa, like if I really want to spread the floor, what are we going to do to bring Georges Niang back, right? You know, you like what Tyrese Maxey does, what he brings. So, you know, Tobias Harris, if we're going to keep him, maybe. But on the defensive end, I think they're going to continue to struggle, because when we talk about perimeter D, like I don't see anybody out there that's locking them down. I think Anthony Melton did a pretty good job, but he struggled against bigger guards. He's only like 6'2", right? So I think when we say that, when you look at this roster, I mean, they don't have a lot of room to upgrade the roster, but at the same time, it's like you look at it and there's a lot of weaknesses, especially on the defensive end.
Keith, I don't think you know, a lot of Sixers fans are going to like to hear this, and I get it. But is there a possibility that Maxey is included in some kind of he's way more than a sweetener. I don't mean it that way, but include it in a deal to maybe offload Harris and try to retool this thing sort of on the fly? Do you think that's a possibility?
I mean, it could be. I mean, you know, I wouldn't do it, but it could be. I mean, you know, it's funny that you said that, because, you know, there's a lot of on social media, like you look into stuff, and there's a lot of people in Philly who want Tobias Harris going, right? They wanted him going in his contract. And then there are people saying, well, if we get Fred VanVleet, then we're going to be great. But in order for that to happen, Fred would have to do a sign and trade. And then you're saying, but is Toronto really want to take on Tobias Harris's contract? Like, because it's going to have to be a multiplayer thing. Yeah. Are they really going to want to take on Tobias Harris' contract, especially knowing that he's in the final year of his deal? So if I'm a team, I'm saying you don't have any first-round picks, but you do have Tyrese Maxey. And that could be something enticing for a team. You look at him and you see what you can do moving forward. And he could be, you know, in the right situation, I think Maxey is going to be a great player. But, yeah, if I'm a team, I'm asking for it. But if I'm Daryl Morey, I don't know if I'm willing to give that up.
Right.
We keep hearing this rumors running amok now that VanVleet could be headed to the 76ers, which the perception is would be a good offshoot of letting James Harden go. Do you see it that way?
I think it would. I mean, here's the thing. Like, James is already halfway out the door, right? I think when you talk now, you could probably say there's probably going to be some better guards out there. But then when you look at someone for a coach, like a lot of times it's kind of like maybe not the best player out there, but the best fit for the coach, and then someone that you can possibly get. And if they can get him, and you know he's probably going to make less than the $50 million that Harden wants. So that's one of those things where I think that could be a good option. But the problem is, you know, when you look at Fred, and let's say, you know, you have to give Tyrese Maxey up with Tobias. So then you have Fred, a guy who has injuries, problems, and you have Embiid, a guy who's had injury problems. What else do you have on his roster?
Yep.
You know what I mean? That's the problem right then and there. Like, you know, what else do you have?
Well, the other thing, not to belabor the VanVleet thing, but like, can you really have VanVleet and Maxey in a backcourt? You're tiny, number one. I don't know. That doesn't seem like a fit to me from a defensive standpoint for a guy who likes, you know, Nurse as a defensive coach. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense, Keith. Does Harden? I mean, Harden is not afraid to launch a three. We know that. But does he fit the other aspects of what Nurse brings to the table defensively and some of the things he likes to do schematically offensively if he's here?
I mean, I think offensively he does. Like, we know he likes shooting a three, right?
Yeah.
But also I think that the thing with James that scares me, now who knows? Like, you know, everybody thinks James is going to leave, right? But the thing that scares me is James is saying he wants a more wide open offense. He wants like to be able to do things. So either, you know, they're going to do either like the new coach is going to be willing to do that if James comes, because if not, it's not going to work out. Like, I mean, and then it's not really going to work out with Embiid. So I think that when you have James saying that, unless he comes back and says, "Oh, I didn't mean what I said," this and that, it's not going to work long term with him and Embiid, because right now, this past season, he basically became Robin to Embiid's Batman, and got the assist title. And if he's saying that he wants a more wide open offense and he wants to have more freedom to do what he does, that's telling me that that's not going to work out between him and Embiid, regardless of what the coach does. You understand?
Yeah.
So I'm a little concerned about that. Now, offensively, if everything's going right, yes. Defensively, no. I mean, because the thing is, Van Vliet. I always mispronounce the guy.
I want to say Fleet. I want to say Fleet every time.
Yeah, I mean, and then the people in Toronto get upset if you.
Oh, they lose it. Yeah.
But so I'll just say Fred. The thing about Fred is he's a better defender than Maxey and Harden. Yeah. But the one thing that you did say, they are two smaller guards, right? Now, it worked a little bit with Kyle Lowry. It did work, but they are smaller guards.
Well, go ahead, Johnny.
I'm sorry. You put it out there first that you believe that Harden is headed back to Houston. And I love your insight and your perspectives, and I am not here to disagree with you in any way, shape, or form. But there is a part of me that believes that Harden is trying to use this as leverage to call the Sixers bluff also. Do you think that's a possibility as well? Or do you honestly think he is so determined to go back to Houston that no matter what the Sixers try to do, because there's belief that Morey wants to keep him here in Philly, that Harden's determined to get back to Houston?
Yeah, you know what? Like, I mean, look, believe me, with you saying that, it doesn't hurt me because, to be honest with you, I felt the same. Like, when I was in where I was at, I was like, are y'all sure? Are y'all sure this isn't a ploy? No, I'm like, are you sure? So, yeah, I'm with you. And it could be. I mean, it could be because, when you look at James Harden, you say to yourself, are you willing to give this guy that money? Now, yes, he scored 45 and 42 points in the playoffs, right? But outside of that, he really struggled. So when you do is sometimes you create a market. Now, from what I'm hearing is that, the Houston Rockets expect to get him but they expect to win. Like that roster they have right now, if they can make some changes, they're going to try to make it. So that might play into what James is doing. Maybe he knows some things that he's not saying. But yeah, I do feel like James was trying to get some money out of the Sixers, but the Sixers are basically saying that, look, we're not trying to work with you that way. Like, we're not going to mess up our short term or our long term. So basically, it seems like they're not willing to give him that money. Now, who knows, y'all? Both sides say what they want, and then July 6th could be a different story. But I'm just telling you, they both seem to be that they're not giving up what they want.
Keith, I am curious about the relationship with Harden and Embiid. Like, it seemed like when Embiid won the MVP, they were all mobbing him in that conference room and the watch presentation. I mean, it seemed like all was cool there. But you point out something interesting. When Harden throws the thing like he's looking for the offensive freedom, it tells me he's not thrilled with being Robin. Like, he still thinks he's Batman. So just from that standpoint, is there maybe not a fit there anymore with those two from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think probably not a fit. I mean, they when they come in, guys always try to work it out, right? And they all say, "This ain't what I said. You didn't hear me say it. I don't know who told you that." One of those things. But I think what we saw is, you see a guy like James, and James is one of those athletes who's always been the man. It's like having a receiver who's for most of his career, he's a number one. And then you tell them, all right, you got to be a number two, or we want you in the slot. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they still think they're number one. And there's nothing against the other guy. It's just that sometimes they have a breakout game and show you signs of what they used to be, and they think that they're still that guy. And I think that's what James Harden is. He feels as if that he's still that guy. He's not ready to relinquish that role. He felt like, you know what? I'm doing what I can do to help the Sixers win a championship. I gave up $15 million. I did everything, and we still went out in the second round. So why should I continue to sacrifice and give up who I am when the teams has always been at their best with me scoring a bunch of points.
Keith, I'm not giving James Harden a max contract at 33 years of age. I'm sorry, I'm just not doing it. I don't care how much it hurts my team because I know I'm cap restraint. We're draft pick restraint. I'm taking that. I'm biting that bullet. James Harden is not getting a 4-year max contract from me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. And here's my thing. Like, to be honest with you, I was on the phone with somebody today, and I was like, all things equal, if you take out, like, looking at their current rosters, if I'm James Harden, I'd rather take the Houston Rockets deal anyway, because I believe they can give them they could give them 201.7 million.
Woo.
Where the Sixers can give them what, 210. So when I know that's, again, believe me, millionaires, right? That's $9 million. I would love to have $5 million. I would love to have $800,000.
Yeah, for real.
When you factor in the city wage tax, the cost of living, a no state tax in Texas, if I'm James, I'm going back to Houston. If it wasn't for the championships and all that other stuff. That's just me.
What do you think it is for him, Keith? I know he's got the home in Houston. His mother makes her home there now. I know he grew up in California, but he's, transitioned over to Houston. He's got places that he likes to hang out there. And he's a legend in that town. And the money. What do you think ultimately it's about for him at this point? Is his playing?
I think, like, Houston is kind of like a place where he became James Harden that we know of, right? It's also a place where he has a lot of businesses and a lot of things like that. I think that has a lot to do, and his mom's there and a lot of his family. Like, when he went to Houston, apparently what I heard is people in his family moved to Houston. Now, so he has, like, his whole inner circle and everything there, a lot of businesses, stuff like that. And like you said, his lifestyle. I mean, it's one of those things where he just loves that city. Now, but it's also where there was times, like, people forget, if James had a couple days off, or like he didn't go with the team to OKC to like play in the game, he had the night off. Well, James went to Houston.
Right.
He spent New Year's in Houston, so he has a lot of ties there. And I guess, some people like, hey, I'm the legend here. This is where I'm gonna retire. I'm 33 years old. I'm going to get my last contract. I like the quality of life here. And I think that's what it is for him.
Do you think there's any way, shape, or form that James Harden has more clout with the Sixers front office than Joel Embiid? I know his history with Morey. I get that. But do you think he has more clout than Embiid does here?
I think he probably has more clout with the front office, but I think Embiid has more clout with the ownership. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? If that makes sense. I mean, think about it. James Harden, he's been with Daryl Morey for a while. Like, James Harden was basically that acquiring James Harden from the Oklahoma City Thunder basically propelled Daryl Morey's career. And it also did the same thing for James, right? So these two guys are close. And then, he comes here and he gets James. Yeah, I mean, I think James has a lot of clout when it comes to Daryl Morey. A lot. But again, Daryl Morey can make suggestions, but he's not the one cutting the check.
Keith, with the lack of draft picks, not really a ton of money to play with, even if Harden walks, how do you change this thing? I mean, I know it's not going to be major overhauls. Embiid's going to be back, et cetera, but what do you do to try and get this thing over the hump here?
I think that, you got to hope and pray that you can make a trade for someone. Yeah. And then it has to be like we talked about Fred, because I keep butchering his last name. It has to be. Wait.
What's his last name again?
Fred VV.
VV. FVV.
Yeah, FVV. That's what I'm calling. So like, I think it has to be one of those things where, you look at a team where they feel like they look at Tobias Harris and they think they can take on his salary and maybe you can do a sign and trade or with another player. But I think that, Tobias is one of the few assets that they have, or, you got Maxey too. And in Joel, but you're not willing to give up Joel. At least they're saying that. And then, so you got to think long and hard about that. But so to me, outside of that, they really don't have a lot of options. Like the problem is, like, we're talking about, we're not going to give James $50 million, right? You're not going to do that. So the question is, and it's crazy because there's a catch-22. Like, you can't win with James Harden, a 33-year-old guy who wants to make $50 million a year. Like, that's a hard sell. But also, if you get rid of James Harden, you really don't have another ball handler on the team. You just don't. Another field facilitator or leader like that, a guy who knows where everybody has to be. They don't have that. So the Sixers are in a tough spot. And in order for them to get out of it, if he doesn't come back, they're going to have to try to make a trade. And like, I think Tobias Harris will have to be the guy that goes.
Okay, so Embiid is 30 now. New coach, new direction. If they continue on the same course, and I'm trying to be optimistic here, but I'm also thinking when you look at the current state of this team could take a step back this coming season more so than a step forward because they're so restrained in terms of being able to move pieces around, no draft picks to get better, younger and get better, so on and so forth. So with that said, with Embiid at 30 years old now, how much farther do you go with Embiid before you start talking about we got to move him to try to get something for him?
Yeah, I think the window is starting to close if it hasn't already. I mean, I think you got it like this year. You got to think long and hard, especially if they don't get out of the second round, what you're going to do moving forward. Because, right now he's the MVP. I know he has an injury history, but his stock is high. Now, I don't know if I would trade him right now, but if you do another second rounder, I think it's time to reboot. And I also think that Embiid might not be the only one. I mean, I think that, Daryl Morey could be in trouble, because before you could blame Doc Rivers. Well, now you're the guy, So I think that a lot of things could happen. Now, do they want to get rid of Embiid? I don't know. But at the same time, I think that if they go out in the second round again, Joel Embiid's going to look around and probably say, hey, this is my legacy. Like, maybe I want to go elsewhere and get a title. And they may think like, maybe we may want to send him elsewhere and get some assets for him.
The only reason I ask you that is because you look at what Utah did. I mean, they went as far as they could go with that nucleus, Donovan Mitchell, all these guys, Gobert. Then they had a fire sale and started over. And that's what I'm thinking. We could be very soon looking at this for a 76ers team.
Exactly, and not to cut you off, but when you look at now, there are certain teams like you look at the New York Knicks, right?
Yeah,
and I'm just saying, the New York Knicks acquired a plethora of draft picks, hoping and praying that a team it will say, "Hey, you want our superstar? I mean, you want our superstar, and we'll give you all these picks." Now, I don't know if the Sixers will want to just give them to the Knicks because that could come back to haunt them, right? A lot, that team that close. But there are teams that, and we talk about the picks that they got for Rudy Gobert. You talk about Dejounte, who was it? The San Antonio Spurs.
Dejounte Murray.
Dejounte Murray. And we're talking about Joel Embiid. Like, yo, I mean, come on. The Sixers will get a bunch of stuff for him.
Yeah.
Last one from me, Keith, regarding Embiid and Nurse. Nurse is a guy who's not afraid to call guys out sometimes publicly. A, how do you think that'll rub Joel? And B, I sort of look at it like I think these guys need a little calling out sometimes and a little less, catering to. But if he doesn't respond well to that, that could also spell maybe the end after this year with Joe.
It could. Yeah, it actually could. But you know what? The more that you think about it, I think I'm right. I'm with you. You're right. I think that Joel does need some of that. Like as much as, the players run the NBA, but I do think that finally you need somebody to stop pacifying you, like, doing this and that. Sometimes you might have to get some of that stuff that you don't want to hear. You know what I mean? You might have to get that. And then the second thing is, it's like, we got to be honest with ourselves. Like, they went out here and they brought Doc Rivers in and they said, hey, you come in here and you fix it. We remember Doc was saying, hey, look, I got to make changes. He was making excuses for Ben Simmons, and that turned out to bite him in the tail. And I think if you get another coach in here and he's going to the ownership group and saying, look, man, there's a reason why you guys can't get out the second round. You know what I mean? And I think that it comes a point where they're kind of sort of like, okay, well, let's listen. Because, you know, I'm pretty sure Doc looked at it and he changed the culture a little bit. But, you know, Doc went out just like Brett Brown did. I mean, so now you got Nick Nurse saying things. I think that they're going to listen, and they're going to realize is not a you problem, it's a me problem.
Right. Yep. Well said. Well said. Well
Perfect.
said. Keith, go ahead. You got one more, Gunner? Or
That's it, man. I'm good.
Keith,
man.
I know you got to get running. I know they got a 3:00 press conference for the introduction of Nick Nurse, but we always appreciate your time, man. Thank you for jumping on with us.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Thanks, Keith. All right,
Appreciate
Keith Pompey does a great job, man. Really great job with his insights for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Again, follow him on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers. Gunner, let me think about that. I mean, to me, if Nurse is critical publicly of either Joel or the team, and that rubs him or anybody else the wrong way, then maybe that guy's just not for you at this point. And I don't mean Nick Nurse. I mean, maybe it's time to think in terms of bringing somebody else in. Like you might be getting to that point with Joel with one more year of this.
I think when it comes to the role players, it won't affect them because they're just happy to be on a team making what they make, a 7-figure income.
Yeah.
And when you really think about it, I think the only player that this caters to is Joel. It starts with Joel and ends with Joel. He's the catalyst that makes this thing tick right now. And and as we've seen in recent years, it has only worked up to a certain point. And if it affects Joel to the point where he can't function the way he needs to function, then it's time to move on from him. And it's time to rebuild this thing. And I think the Sixers fan base is getting to a point where if we tear it down and rebuild it, maybe it's not so bad. I think if they did that, there would be more relief than frustration in terms of, okay, just like Utah did. We went as far as we could with this. Let's see how many draft picks we can get, and let's start this thing over. Nick Nurse will get a clean slate to get in his type of players, have input to get his type of players in here with defensively, offensively, whether it's through the draft or free agency. And let's rebuild this. Now, we may have to bite the bullet for a year and be one of the lower tier teams. It may not even make the playoff for 1 year. But if it looks good on paper, better than it did during the Joel Embiid tenure, then I think fans will have a lot more patience with that. But it's such a tricky road to hoe because you don't have a lot of players that are worth first-round trade value other than Maxey and Embiid.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about it.
Yeah,
so
they're in a pretty tough spot.
They're in a tough spot, dude. This is a tough spot, and I keep bringing up Utah because this is exactly what happened in Utah. Maybe they kept that nucleus of players together 1 year too long, and then they finally came to the realization when we look at the teams in our conference, the Golden States, the Phoenixes, the Clippers, the Lakers, we're never going to get past all of the landmines we need to get to the promised land, which Denver just did, which is the NBA Finals. So you tear it down and you try to start all over again. And that's, I think, where the Sixers are right now. You try to do it with Embiid. You try to do it with Ben Simmons. You brought Harden in here. You drafted a great kid in Maxey. It's not working. Mm-hmm. We got to go to a different route now.
Yeah, and there's one common denominator. So and again, he'll meet with the media at 3:00. But in the Sixers press release, there are some quotes here. From Nurse. He said, quote, "I'm honored to be named head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, a storied franchise in a tradition-rich city. Thank you to Josh Harris, David Blitzer, and the ownership group for this incredible opportunity. It's been a fun challenge coaching against this group over the last 5 years. Now I look forward to coaching the 76ers and doing my part to deliver for this tremendous fan base." I'm trying to think see if there's anything else here. All right, so from the Sixers, this is their release from Daryl Morey. "We are absolutely thrilled to welcome Nick Nurse as the new head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. His championship pedigree and diversity of experience mixed with his uniquely creative approach made him our top priority. We are confident that his leadership and expertise will help us unlock the full potential of our talented roster and bring an exciting new era of championship basketball to Philadelphia. All right. So there's, on both ends. Yeah. We got it right there on his hiring. All right. So, I mean, look, he's saying all the right things. They're saying all the right things. Here's what I will say. I feel like when they landed Doc Rivers, he was definitely the top target out there at the time. And I feel like Nick Nurse was probably the number one guy of all the candidates out there this time around too. I mean, so they have, at least for whatever reason, been able to land the big fish, to their credit. It hasn't worked out with Doc. We'll see what happens with Nurse, but at least they're getting that guy. So it should be interesting.
I think it's the perfect scenario for Nick, and it's a bad situation for the 76ers. And here's why. I think Nick looked at this and said, okay, I've got Embiid, but I'm also strapped in terms of I have to work with what I'm given. I don't have much input. So if we have to take a step back, we will. From a 76er standpoint that's trying to get over the hump of getting past the second round, the fans are not going to be as patient as they've been up to this point. Mm-hmm. As they navigate through this season, they're going to be more critical, maybe even more seats empty if this team goes south and goes through a lengthy losing streak more so than a winning streak. I don't see that happening, but it could, as we know the NBA. And then they've got to come out of this smelling like a rose next year if it goes bad. Nick buys himself a little extra time to get this team the way he wants it. And the 76ers have to endure the persecution of the media and the fan base for what they put them through and money they've made them spend watching the product on the court for a fourth consecutive season along those lines. They've really got to really sit down and look at this thing and say, what do we do here to make this better sooner rather than later? And the only way I think to do that, Rob, is to get as many draft picks back as you can, free yourself from this cap restraint you're under, and bring in a few good mid-level veterans to complement the youth movement that you're going to have to take within the immediate future.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's come back, Derek. I'll give you a couple of updates from what's going on with Eagles OTAs, which kicked off, about 35 minutes ago. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Some sports media news that's taking place. I'm curious where you fall on it. So we'll dig into that at our 2:00 segment. Tom Brady addresses whether or not he'll come back. Bill Belichick takes the blame. Matthew Slater rips the kickoff rule. And we're going to look at new coaches and which we think will be the most successful in the 2023 season. So we'll do all of that. Remember, last segment, we'll preview the Heat Nuggets NBA Finals. We'll get into that. We got birthdays. We got movies. We got a lot more for you, so don't go anywhere. He's Derek. I'm Rob. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk about Pro Action Restoration. Pro Action Restoration is the place that you turn to if your home, your business, a property that you own may go through the inconvenience and pain and fear, frankly, of what happens when you get water, smoke, mold damage, etc. But here's the beauty. Pro Action Restoration is on call 24 hours, 7 days a week to assist. I know I've gone through it on a Saturday. They got right out. They cleaned up the problem at my parents' house. The crew was professional, clean. The price was more than reasonable. They are licensed, bonded, and fully insured. Pro Action Restoration has been serving the tri-state area for more than 2 decades, and they will work in conjunction with your insurance company. So that's huge. Water, fire, smoke damage, mold remediation, you name it, they can handle it all. Give them a call, 610-623-3760, 610-623-3760, or on